The reputation of a brand is one of the most important facets of any existing media property and can typically be the deciding factor in the lifespan of said property. However, it's not always possible to control the narrative that surrounds a piece of media. Once it's in the public eye, it's pretty much a gamble on how it will be received and the reputation that it gains from that point on. There are factors that can be somewhat controlled, like the timing of release, the aesthetics, the quality of the property itself. You get the gist. The Kingdom Hearts series is no different to the ever-shifting perspectives of not only the fans, but the general public as a whole. The series has become infamous for a variety of reasons, but today I want to hone in on one of the most prominent opinions on the franchise. Why do people think the Kingdom Hearts games are confusing? As a heads up, this video will lean more towards an opinion-based view than my last few videos, but will of course still be based mainly off of the facts. I picked 5 of the main reasons why I believe that the series has gained its reputation over the years, and for all the efforts the developers put in, just can't seem to shake it off. The first point that comes to mind, and the one I believe is the main culprit behind the series gaining the reputation of being confusing, is that up until 2013, the games were famously released across a multitude of different platforms. 2002 would see the release of the first Kingdom Hearts game on the PS2, with the direct sequel release on Game Boy Advance in 2004. The third game in the series, Kingdom Hearts 2, would then be released in 2005, also on the PS2. Immediately, we can see the issue at hand. Not only was the direct sequel of the first game released on a completely separate console than the first, but it was not named Kingdom Hearts 2, leading people to believe that it was a side game with no relevance towards the main plot. The naming conventions would continue to play a big role in forming the current narrative surrounding the games. If the third game in the series held the title of 2, then it would make sense for people to be rightfully confused when starting Kingdom Hearts 2 and having no context for where that game's story begins if they've never played Chain of Memories and experienced the events of that game. At the time, Square Enix attempted to remedy this by releasing a full remake of Chain of Memories on the PS2 in 2007 alongside the initial release of Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix in Japan, before releasing it as a standalone title almost 2 years later in December of 2008 for North America. However, not even a full year later would we then get the release of 358 Days Over 2 for the Nintendo DS, which would quickly be followed up by the release of not only Birth by Sleep in January of 2010 for the PSP, but also Recoded for the DS in the same year. Funnily enough, Recoded was also a remake of the Japanese-only mobile game Coded. Technically, the North American release of Birth by Sleep was in September of 2010, and Recoded's release was in January of 2011, but you get the picture. In 2012, we would then get Dream Drop Distance on the 3DS, followed by the release of Unchained, another mobile game, the very next year. In preparation for the eventual release of Kingdom Hearts 3, this would be the year they began to release the HD collections, with 1.5 releasing first for the PS3, followed by 2.5 in 2014, and finally 2.8 in 2017 for the PS4. This would make a total of 6 different platforms that the series was spread across before the release of the collections. Between all of the consoles and the many different naming conventions, it's not really a wonder that the game gained the reputation of being confusing if people were coming in at different points of the story, as it was unrealistic to expect many people to have had access to all of these different consoles. For comparison, it would be similar to having Thor Ragnarok be your introduction to the Marvel Infinity Saga. Enjoyable to be sure, but there's no way you'd have a complete understanding of the characters, their backstory, relationships, motivations, or even all of their powers and how they got in the situation they were in to begin with. This is not to say that this made the games unenjoyable. Anecdotally, I've heard many people say some of their first Kingdom Hearts games were some of the handheld titles, and while they didn't understand everything happening, they enjoyed it enough to fully immerse themselves into the series as a whole. But this leads us rather nicely into my next point. The series is going on a near 25-year run with no real sign of stopping anytime soon. The Kingdom Hearts series is long, and almost every single game is canon to the overarching narrative at hand. That means that it has an incredibly dense amount of information for a person to remember. Keep in mind, this is not a failing of the series either. It's actually a sign of the series' success and long-standing popularity. But due to that same longevity, that means it's easy to forget details, especially if you're someone who enjoys the games and its story beyond a surface level. Outside of the general premise, it's the many smaller details that tend to trip people up. This is a series that rewards you for remembering details, but if you aren't consistently refreshing yourself on those details, you might misremember or completely forget something important to the plot altogether. Luckily, the developers are aware of this. They've tried to make understanding and remembering the important elements of the lore as easy as possible for players. In each game, you can find story summaries, glossaries for terminology, character connections, and more. It's also included in the writing, as the characters themselves sometimes need to be clued into things that happen outside of their perspective, which serves as a helpful reminder to the players as well. from this standpoint, they've really put in a lot of effort in making the series as accessible as possible, and I believe the success of Kingdom Hearts 3 in terms of sales points to that being the case. For people who were never able to play the series or had only heard about it in passing, they're able to simply buy the collections on the big three platforms. Those who experience the series this way generally come away enjoying it as a whole, and from what I've personally seen, a fairly accurate understanding of the story. With that being said, there is one glaring element of the story that most agree creates a point of contention within and outside of the fandom, and that would be the introduction of time travel. While I won't be covering the mechanics of how time travel works in the series, see my previous Kingdom Hearts Explained video for that breakdown, what I will speak about is how, by even introducing it into the series, at a point where everyone was growing weary of the wait for Kingdom Hearts 3, it very nearly torpedoed the series before it even released. Shortly after the release of Dream Drop Distance, there were many people that felt that the series was on a downward spiral, specifically because of the introduction of time travel to the story. Many had a hard time understanding why the story was headed in this direction, and struggled to understand the implications that time travel would have on the overall plot. Time travel has a bad reputation, and whenever it's introduced into a story, most people are immediately apprehensive about how it will affect the narrative. And for good reason. Typically, whenever time travel is added to a story, it tends to either create plot holes or remove tension from the story, sometimes both. For Kingdom Hearts, all it really did was just allow for Nomura to bring back some of his favorite characters for one last time while setting up some of the previously underutilized characters for a bigger story. The mechanics of how this particular version of time travel is what can trip a lot of people up, but it's not exactly necessary to understand how it works in order to understand the impact it's having on the events of the game. But this one aspect has been used to create a narrative that the games are, among many things, poorly written and nonsensical. There's a lot you could say about the writing of the Kingdom Hearts series, and there's a strong but unfounded belief that the games are being written with Nomura making things up on the fly and constantly retconning or changing the meaning behind previously established elements. While there are some minor inconsistencies, see Donald's reaction to the mysterious tower in Kingdom Hearts 2 vs. Birth by Sleep, they are not major enough to really be of a concern. The idea that the games are poorly written is honestly incredibly subjective, and everyone pretty much has a different opinion on the subject. But the reason I place this topic here as a major reason why people consider the games confusing is not because of the writing itself, but because there's a vocal group of people who say that the story is hard to understand because of the writing being bad. There are some that will say things don't make sense in the story, and if you look into it just a bit, it's typically because they've either misunderstood something, forgotten something, or weren't aware of it for various reasons. The biggest is that they missed playing one or more of the games. As I stated before, because this is a nearly 25-year-old game series, there's going to be a lot to remember. People forget the little details, and in a story like this, the little details matter. So if they've forgotten, misunderstood, or just missed out on an entire game thinking it wasn't integral to the plot and those story elements end up being relevant, then it makes sense that they might be confused. However, that doesn't mean the writing is poor. There is also a misconception that Nomura is the only one writing for the series when that couldn't be further from the truth. He has many scenario writers and he oversees all of it. These scenario writers also influence the story in subtle ways or even sometimes bigger ways. To give an example, Shion was named by a scenario writer, not Nomura. This actually brings me to my last point. Both the series and Nomura are surrounded by a constant stream of misinformation that really ramped up directly after the release of Kingdom Hearts 3. Many people believe to this day that the development of Kingdom Hearts 3 began directly after the release of Kingdom Hearts 2, all the way back in 2005, creating the narrative that the game had been in development for more than 10 years. Production on the game began roughly around the time that it was first announced, and it was only announced that early due to a potential leak. After the first year, the dev team had to switch from working in the Luminous engine to Unreal Engine 4, losing a lot of assets they had already created in the process, although the game ended up being better for it in the end. With a month delay, the game released in January of 2019, ultimately making the development of the game take about 5 years if you leave out the year they lost due to the engine switch. The misinformation spiraled from there, from accusations that Nomura was negatively affecting the story and gameplay for games he had no actual hand in creating, to rumors of the game being marketed as the end of the series, when you can find interviews of Nomura speaking about how the games will go past the Xehanort saga as early as 2010. While the game has its flaws, as all of them do, there was so much misinformation that surrounded the game, including exaggerations of what some may consider flaws to an absurd degree. It helped fuel the narrative that the game was not only confusing but also bad. Elements that exist in almost every other game in the series were suddenly vilified and used to justify the vitriol that Kingdom Hearts 3 received. While this has simmered down over the years with more people speaking out in defense of both the series and Nomura after playing the games for themselves, even the mention of liking either one will bring out someone touting the same misinformation that was created around this time frame. Like I said, while the game has its flaws, being able to bring many of the previous loose threads to a close while establishing interest for the future games, to me, is a sign of a coherent and good story. Many people who first played the games when the collections were released seem to have had a more enjoyable and easier time understanding what's happening, probably due to the fact that they had a better chance at remembering the smaller details than someone who hadn't played the first and second games in over 10 years. Depending on how you got into the series, it might determine how you feel about how easy or difficult it is to comprehend the story, at least on a surface level. So, do you think there might be other reasons that the games have the reputation of being confusing, or do you feel I hit the nail on the head with these points? Let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.